Yes.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. So the biggest thing we learned this time is the deer movement has changed big time. So this, like everywhere, all the sites where we got deer previously, it's like the deer have significantly dropped. And then the sites where we weren't getting deer before, deer are there, like this site. So we'll start off with site.
This would be a great question for Cody and Sarah and the deer coloring team. How their migratory is, are we seeing migration occurring? So it's, yeah, we're intrigued.
Yeah, it's totally flipped. And we also got deer roadkill, which is very interesting. So we'll start at site 22. This is where we found that bear track, and it's our third bridge of the study site. And look at this. So successful crossing, and there's the other deer coming up. And there, remember, there's a barbed wire fence on the eastbound side, so they have to jump over that. And the center section has a little bit of water before it got all the way up to this pillar. So then it continues. So these are the first crosses. Before, we didn't even get deer here. They would just kind of walk along the highway, and you can hear the cars. So next, it's on a different date, March 9th. So just look at the behavior. Going through, and you notice it's like a small group. There's only a few individuals together. That's about to change. Let's move over to site 24. So just north of this site. Now this is the area that was really difficult. Remember, Mari, you, Eric, Tanya, and I visited this site. It was kind of a tricky one because we wanted to see what was using it. There's lots of concrete, and Greg, you can see like the riprap up here, like these large boulders. So those sites are difficult to put a stake in or put a camera in because it's like they're just open for the taking. Well, we found this embankment, and I was able to position it in a way where you could see all three sections. And it's like on the eastern side, it has like this drop. And this is the western side. Look at the behavior.
This is where Long Valley Creek crosses underneath here, but it's pretty channelized and it's typically flooded.
So now you start seeing more individuals together. And when we were out with Mari, we actually seen like a live sighting of deer in the area. But the key to this one is it doesn't look passable. It's concrete throughout, and there's water like almost all year round, and it has a drop. So then let's go to the next one. So they're just here drinking, and they actually cross the river. So look at this. And you can still hear the cars. So there's only a fence on the northern section, on the northern side, but the fence stops and it's open to the highway. But look at all those deer just crossing. Now what we want to record, so we have the saying, so no data is good data. So like if we don't get crosses here, but we know they're there, that's a very important sign. So check out this behavior. So you can see that deer approach and look what it does. So like it's approaching the opening of the culvert. It gets deeper, so it kind of like sinks in. And then it gets repelled.
So if there was some way to improve that, it's pretty plausible that they would start utilizing that to move the other direction.
Yeah, so it fits all the criteria. So the openness ratio, like you could see through it, it's not that wide. This is even the shoulder here is kind of short because it's a bridge. So like the shoulder embankament's short when like just past here, when the bridge ends, it widens back up. So just this area, it's relatively short. So like you could see right through it, has good visibility. But the problem is the footing is extremely unstable. So like when the deer walked up to it and it sank, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, this is too sketchy. We're gonna
Yeah.
go. So yeah, if it did have that, but it does facilitate water quite frequently. So that would be a tough one. I was talking to Eric about it. He was like, yeah, that Long Valley Creek. So he brought it up. It definitely, he's like, there's a lot of water through that right now. So it's that's definitely a
What if
hindrance.
they could create some type of bank along one of the sides of the culvert?
Yeah, like so what Tanya's talking about is like here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The problem is on that side, on the opposite side, it has like a drop. So that's why we put the camera here, because I want to see if they even approach it. But it's like a 4-foot drop.
So it'd have to be
Okay.
it'd have to be a concrete embankment so it didn't wash out.
Yeah, because even the substrate here, it changes. So when we first went there, it was a little bit more flat, and because it's so malleable, it like the water moves it. So the landscape's just a little bit different each time. So where they're able to step across, it's now underwater, and before it was like open.
So what's your experience? How do you think would these deer like water slides? You know, you can have a nice
Yeah.
water slide and then drop, you know, you just
Yeah,
That could be a
that's
whole
a
new thing.
yeah, for ungulates, it's like not even coyote or deer have, or coyote or bobcats have even approached it. So, okay, so we know that they're there. So next site, let's move up to site 26 and look at this. So we haven't gotten deer here before. So here they are. And look at this. Now there's a lot of cows here. Here we go. So another herd. So before we even get deer approaches, there's a lot of cows here, and there's a gate. You can again hear the cars. There's a gate right behind the camera where the landowner opens up the gate and lets the cows in and out. That gate is open and it has been open. Previously, it was closed though when we first did camera setups, and you could see like the trail, like the movement areas. They haven't really crossed through here because the other side has a gate too, so they would have to jump numerous gates. But this culvert does have high visibility, and it does seem to be getting a lot of use from smaller animals. But this is the first time like deer have actually approached, and there's like a herd there. So now moving to site 29. So if you
How
see
big
like
was
so
that culvert?
oh, this is a 12-footer.
12 foot. Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty big.
And then this one, this is site 29. So there are landowners on both sides. And on the eastern side, which is the opposite side of the culvert, there's a gate. There's a rather large gate, like 8 feet. And we're getting a lot of hunting from the smaller carnivores. Like, so we're getting hunting from coyote, bobcat. You could actually see there's waterfowl feathers like all strewn about here. So Honey Lake is just to the east. So they go there, they hunt waterfowl, and they come back. And this is our first deer capture here. So you can see this. This one's a little bit sketchier. So unlike the other one, it's shorter. It's not as high. This is a 10-footer. So you can see them like looking in, they hear the cars go by. And they turn away. Unfortunately, with the shift in the movement, we did get, I think, 3 roadkill. And we were there for 3 days. So the first day, this deer at this location wasn't there. So it must have happened. So it happened between the time we left fieldwork and the time we got back the next day. So within 24 hours. I'm not a big fan of showing the images, so I'll just show you like a zoomed out one, just so you get an idea of the area. Here's the most interesting part. This is the at grade section. So right here, where Ron and Greg recommended the at grade setups, it's all along this 12-mile stretch. Our camera was just right here. So that's very interesting. So when you see the deer like approach the road and kind of cross, that's where this deer was hit. So to wrap that up in a more positive light, we are also getting the smaller carnivores going through. This is type 30. And a fluffy bobcat.
They look like lynx to me. They're huge.
They are
You
big.
can still see a little bit of snow right here. That was just like, I think 3 weeks ago. Yeah, so end of February. But see, so like what we learned during this outing was as the season changed, it almost happened immediately. Usually we see we see a little bit before they start doing that. The railroad underpass, so site 23, no deer. And that was one of our highest sites used by deer. Like it was back and forth, none. The other site was the culverts, site 9. That's a unique case though, because well, you'll see we got something unique there, and I think that's repelling the deer from there. So they're kind of shifting their movements a little bit, and it seems like they're crossing the road just a little bit more. There's more tracks on the side of the highway. So Tanya's gonna go into that, and my section is finished.
Do you think, I mean, have there been much difference in water flows in the last couple months? And do you think, if so, do you think that could be factoring into why they're utilizing different structures?
Yeah, definitely. So that's what I was talking to Eric about actually. I was like, hey, because when we were at the mountain lion site, I said, what do you think about the deer? And like, well, there after the mountain lion, there's like 0 deer. And you're right, like that's like not like a hard thing to imagine because it was there like 6 times, I think. But the water, yeah, he said the only one right now, he was like, it's going to be a very harsh summer because the water was like concentrated. So in December, November, December, and a little bit of January, it was a high concentration of water, high water levels. It went through, but then that was it. So now it's starting to recede drastically. He's like, the only places are like Long Valley, and that's it. All the other culverts where they like had like the puddles, they're gone. So that should have something to do with it.
Yeah, and that's why we always like to do year-long studies, because we definitely find that seasonal variation comes into play in so many different facets. The availability of water during drought periods, then when culverts or bridges become flooded, we see more roadkill at bridges where there was high use previously, then they start crossing that grade. And then it's always interesting seeing like when the juveniles disperse in fall, and then often, unfortunately, we see a spike in roadkill then, and we find a lot of juveniles hit on the road as they're trying to disperse from parental habitat and find their own home range. So yet seasonal variation is really interesting, and for the reports, we always include that with the graphs, and then wherever we see things like roadkill spikes, and then if there's things like flooded culverts and bridges, so that will be really interesting. And then the whole layer, adding a whole other layer of migration, will be fascinating. So I can't wait to learn more from Sarah and Cody. I bet they have some great insight into what we're seeing, this shift.
Yeah, and Mario, Greg, another thing is what we found is there's also the familiarity aspect. So like as individuals begin to use these structures and they get used to it, it becomes part of the route. Okay, like the Puma, it's not just one occurrence, it's like 6. Well,
You're totally stealing my thunder.
Okay, so when you have like a juvenile, so we recorded this with Coyote Pups on the Highway 152. When you have the juveniles, they're not used to that route. So what we found was this female had 6 pups, and they figured out the culverts, and these culverts were only like 2.5 feet high, 2.5 feet round cement culverts. The adults figured it out, so they would just snake through the culverts. Well, one time we found an adult and a pup hit on the road, and it was because like the juveniles don't know yet. They're just kind of going everywhere. So the adult had to lead it, try to lead it across the highway. So when you see this, it's like the landscape has changed. They're trying to just figure out their pathway across the highway. So they're crossing that grade.
I always thought when there was flooding events, they would know where to go, but they definitely aren't. They have to figure it out as seasons happen. So to Site 9, and Site 9, just a little recap of what this looks like. This is really interesting because along Site 9 and 10 and 11, there's been directional fencing set up. I think last time we asked Caltrans about this, and they weren't quite sure when this was set up. So it'd be great to dig into that more, because I'm really curious to see if we will see less roadkill on these stretches where there's directional fencing. We actually had several live sightings of deer running along the directional fencing that I'll chat about too. So it looks like it could be effective. So some of it's a little bit of disrepair, but yeah, this is really big culvert and where we saw multiple tracks going through. And previously we recorded almost every other day at least deer going through, but it was a little different this year or this month. We're recording. So of course you're like, oh, just the tail. What was that? That's not fair. So mountain lion on 2/17/22. And there we have it on 2/18/22 the next day. We always try, is it a male, female? The females, their shoulders, males are big, broad shoulders, big, boxy heads. And the females seem to have like lower shoulders, a little sleeker head. And you'll see why I mentioned this. So then, I'm sorry, back on 2/21. Snowing.
Pretty confident walking through that culvert.
Yeah, definitely sauntering, not in a rush.
It's going, I'm the badass of this land.
It's true because we found during this month period, no deer were utilizing the culvert. This is an interesting series. So it's 2/28 at 4:24 a.m. Then 2/28, 4:17.
That's a big cat.
It's
Yeah,
big.
you're right. He does. He
You
does
see
have a little bit of a-
his rear, oh my God. I mean, his rear legs are just, wow.
Huge.
So Tanya and I were discussing something earlier. Can you go back to that one where it's coming, where it's heading east? It does have a little bit of a issue with its right paw,
Yeah,
like
so
a little bit of a step
we might be able to identify this individual
right here.
if there's some type of little injury
See,
going
like-
on.
Yeah, he is limping, huh?
Yeah, and when
Yeah.
the cat circles back, you can kind of see it's favoring that
Yeah.
front right. So that was interesting. Came around, turned back, but then just 3 minutes later, came back through. So I thought that was interesting. What's going on there? So then 4 minutes later, again, there's that little limp. And see how going back to the same video, the shoulders aren't particularly high, the head looks a little sleeker, and that's a lot of back and forth. And then, so same day, just a bit later, to me, and I'd love to get everyone's thoughts, this looks like a much bigger animal.
A little bit of a size difference
It
there.
looks like a male to me. And turn your volume up. Were you able to hear that?
No, replay it.
Little vocalization there.
I didn't hear it.
Oh.
I could hear it from the room though.
Right when you said that, it made a noise. Here, let me try again. Oops. Here. It's at the very end of the video. Maybe you could hear it. I'll send the video. I'm wondering if perhaps because it's mating time, if that's a female going back and forth and that was a male and he's perhaps seeking her out. So that's really interesting. And what completely blew us away is typically mountain lions don't tend to use culverts to travel through. And this is a very large culvert, but even then it's usually bridges. And we've talked to several like Winston Vickers down in Southern California, Chris Wilmers. They tend not to use culverts. So this is really, really cool data because it's, I think, two different individuals using this culvert. And then again on 3/17, and just that difference looks like a female versus that big male that we just saw. What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely looks like a size difference to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think the female's going back and forth going, get that guy away from me. Damn, I'm already limping.
I don't want to have kittens.
Yeah.
and that's where, so those are the tracks I saw, by the way, like right here on 3/17, because I was there two days later or 3 days later. Yeah. So so when it's walking on the left side, those are the tracks I saw. So, and I made a video and I followed it all the way through, and then I went back and I walked up the hillside, and I saw where it came down from.
So fascinating. So this whole time it was just lion data. Then the deer showed up again, and they looked a little more sketched out than they usually do. And it wasn't like the big herd, it was just single individuals. And even this coyote seemed to be checking out. So especially if the female's marking for the males to find her, so it might just reek of mountain lion there. So that was super exciting to see. That was definitely different, and I think especially in terms of things like publications and stuff, you know, the fact that mountain lions using this different covert, and there's just not a lot of data. There's not a lot of data in California of mountain lion using crossings, culverts or bridges, and especially culverts. So this I think will be a really cool contribution. So that was really, really exciting. Then moving down, so we're at site 9, so now just moving up to site 10. And this is that other really large culvert, where we found the multiple bear tracks traveling through, and we've been getting a ton of deer footage. And so it was on pictures, but then he got set up on video, which I'm so glad he did.
So you said Mario site is specifically for wildland, so you can get, like, you could see that they're moving through.
And we're definitely finding now, it's going to be really interesting to look at what structures the deer are using and what they're not using. I think we'll probably find some really interesting patterns. They're starting to shed. And then one thing before I go to the next, I didn't want to forget, during that great connectivity symposium, the wolf DFW biologist, Kent, is it Loudon?
Loudon, yeah, something like that.
He showed one of the collared wolves crossing 395 at several locations. I was wondering if maybe we could reach out and like introduce the project to him and who we are, what we're monitoring. And I was wondering if maybe he could contribute that data so we could overlay it to see if where the wolf was crossing was any of these different culverts or bridges.
Yeah, I can reach out to him. I'd be really curious. Because I remember that that slide he put up, and it seemed like there was a lot of wolf activity around this area of 395.
Yeah, I was freaking out. I think I was raising my little virtual hand, but there wasn't enough time for questions. But I thought, oh, we should follow up with him.
Greg would freak out if we caught a wolf on camera.
Oh, so would I.
Yeah.
I would be like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, we very well we might, because that blew me away. So I'd love to know like how old that caller data is. Is it recent? Is it a couple of years? I wonder if he could maybe, if he understands the study and you know it's the capacity of it, maybe if he gets a wolf coming towards 395, you know, would he be able to share that information? But that would be great if we had wolf collar data to overlay with the camera data and the roadkill data.
Yeah, I feel like it was pretty recent because I think he had OR93's data on that slide.
Oh, cool. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we were out there, we're like, oh, maybe Mari could reach out to Ken. And
yeah, no, I'd be happy to.
Awesome, thank you. So then I think this is my last one, Site 14, Bridge Fund. This was great because we were wondering if the deer were going through with the water levels. And from last month, a little recap, snow was great because we could actually see where they were also crossing through the fence line. So we set up, I think, 4 more cameras this month to get more supplemental data, more at grade along fence lines. There was the bridge where he was showing, he saw that it wasn't capturing the full bridge. So we set up a second camera so we get the full pictures. As we're learning, we're setting up more cameras at locations like this. This isn't video, but still footage, but great to see that they're actually traveling through the river itself. Because in the Bay Area, of course, it's Bay Area, some of the deer, they don't like to get their hooves wet, so they won't even go through.
Well, and I can't remember, how high was the water in this particular bridge, like in January, for example?
Oh, I think you can almost see, it got pretty high. If you look at the culvert wall, can you see my cursor here?
Yeah.
We're looking at that. It looks like
It was below that. Just
Yeah.
a little bit below that.
Mhm,
That probably wouldn't be passable if
mhm,
the water was.
yeah. So yeah, definitely, it'll be really interesting to match up, like get seasonal variation. When there's flooding, are we recording more roadkill events? And when it subsides, are they using these bridges more? So we're really happy to get that. And then yeah, with the roadkill data, there was a total of 3 deer hits. One was at grade site 2 that Ihiga showed. And we actually moved that camera a little closer to where that deer was hit to see if we record more deer at that location. One by Honey Lake, and it was on the northbound site, and it was a little north of one of the large culverts there, and that was a male. And then this location, and sorry, I didn't have enough time to put in the pictures, but there was a deer hit just north of the junction 70. And we set up a at-grade camera, the 6 at-grade camera. There were so many deer tracks going alongside of the Caltrans right away. There's some fencing there. It looks like we can get through that, but it was high activity. So we, as we left, we set up another at-grade camera, and during our stakeholder meeting, I'll also include the pictures, because of thinking of a land bridge, we were pretty blown away. It was one of the locations where the mountains were really close together. And it wasn't just the 2, it was like the east, west, and north. It looked like it could be an amazing connectivity site. And one of the more eastern mountains looks like it's the mountains that lead over down into Truckee. So it looked like maybe it could be a potential location for an overpass, especially with that amount of activity that we saw with the deer tracks. It was heavy use. It also looked like there wasn't any ranching going on. So I was hoping to get at some point some GIS layers that might show land use and protected versus open lands, because that just looked like a really promising location for a land bridge. And there wasn't there's not any big culverts or bridges in that section too, but it looked like it could potentially connect 3 different mountain ranges at that one site. So it was sad to find that deer, but I think that might be an important location. So we'll be really excited to see what's on that 6 at-grade camera.
There's deer track everywhere there, and the closest site is site 7, and that's where it's just like a 4-foot round culvert, and nothing's using it except for like the occasional coyote, but there's deer like tracks going across it.
Mhm.
So and it's just open to the highway.
Yeah, yeah. And the fencing's pretty permeable as well. So that was interesting, because as you get up closer to Honey Lake, the ranges become really far apart. So it's really interesting. And then in terms of live sightings, that was also interesting. We saw 3 deer running along barbed wire fence on the west side of it, so not on the highway side, between sites 5 and 6. And then when we were at the railroad, we actually saw a female and a fawn jump a fence and actually crossed the highway at the railroad overpass and had a heart attack. But they successfully crossed there. And then we saw 4 deer running alongside directional, and they were on, again, not on the highway side, they were actually on the directional fencing side, just north of site 9. And now that the snow has melted, it's really amazing to see how many trails are along that directional fencing. It looks like the directional fencing is really effective, and that they are traveling alongside it until they get to another structure. So yeah, I think the directional fencing effort that they've all been leading there is so critical, because it was really interesting to see those different live sightings.
And you recall I don't think they have any directional fencing projects planned north of the junction, right? It's all south of that.
I think so. That would be great to ask during the stakeholder meeting. Yeah, I definitely think this data will help inform further fencing. And roadkill, I think not this month, but the previous month, he found a gray fox. So we're finding smaller animals as well.
Yeah, early March.
Mm. So for the stakeholder meeting, we'll have, I'll fill this more with the live sighting photos. Definitely where this deer was hit, that looked like a really interesting location for some type of structure like a land bridge. I think that's it for me.
We came in on time.
Thanks so much. Here, let me just stop